Okay, so this screencast is to support the lesson from Straightforward Pre-Intermediate 7A Work Experience. It focuses on the present perfect simple and the topic is work. The full reference for this piece of material is Straightforward Pre-Intermediate by C. Jones and P. Kerr, that's Kerr, K-E-R-R, publisher Macmillan, and year 2005. So please make sure that's on any handouts that you give out to students and on your lesson plan. You're going to need four different things. Number one, students' book notes, looks like this. And also the teacher's book notes. There's quite a few pages of them, very useful, particularly for the grammar. There's a language reference which gives you good information about the grammar involved, present perfect. And the fourth thing you're going to need is the audio file. Although, as when I talk about the material, you'll see that I'll give you an option for doing something different and not using the audio if you don't fancy it. Okay, so there's quite a lot going on in this piece of material. You've got some speaking first off to warm people into the topic. You've got some great vocabulary to do with work, very nice stuff there. Bit of speaking there to activate that vocabulary. Then there's a listening, which acts as a context for the grammar, present perfect simple, and then some control practice, and then hopefully some freer practice here. There's also a lovely prompt section on and Might be tricky to fit in the time, I think. So I'd probably be drilling the past participles in the as you go, rather than treating this as a separate pronunciation part. I think if you're trying to divide it into two 45-minute lessons, it's not so clear exactly where the split would be. I think that 45 minutes for the speaking and the vocabulary is probably a good amount of time. I'm not sure that that first person can also fit in the listening. So I think the listening needs to go over to the second person, and then I think we need to shorten it a bit. So let's talk about the first part. So at the beginning, we want to get the students thinking about jobs and just warm them up and get them talking as much as we can. That speaking exercise up there, it seems okay, but I'd probably make it a bit more dynamic, maybe have a slide with some pictures of different jobs and then describe one of the jobs and see if the students can guess which one it is. Put numbers next to the jobs to make it easier for them to do the guessing. And then once you've done a couple of examples, pick a strong student, get them to take the role of describing the job and the other people guess. You might be able to turn it into a competition, I'm not quite sure. But the idea is just to get the students talking and warmed up to the topic. So this context of famous people sort of carries through the next few things, including the listening. I think it would be nice to use these pictures or some other ones of Madonna and Tom Cruise and I think it's Leonardo DiCaprio. No, it's Brad Pitt, excuse me. Maybe get the pictures up, ask the students, do they know who they are? They might well not if they're ESOL students, but they might, particularly Tom Cruise maybe. So bring up the pictures, who's this, what do you know about them, just to get a bit of schemata going, get people warmed up to the topic. And then go into exercise 1, which covers some really useful vocab, the difference between job and work, the difference between career and job. Very nice. So get the students first to choose which one they think is the correct item, and then in the feedback make sure you check meaning thoroughly. Okay, so you're going to need to plan some CCQs here. Number 2, introduce a few more very useful expressions as well. I think the students matching them together seems like a good idea. Put it up on the screen, give them time to think, give them time to write down the number and the letter that go together. Then let them talk together to see if they agree. And then come in as the teacher and clarify meaning and form and pronunciation. Again, you're going to need some CCQs. You might need some little extra situations to illustrate the meaning of the vocabulary. Then we want to activate some of that vocabulary, and I think that's what number 3 is intending to do. It doesn't need to earn a living, has an interesting career. Yeah, it's not bad, is it? So You could get the students talking about these things in groups, maybe go into breakout rooms for this, okay? Get them talking, and while they're talking, you are listening and noting down errors that you hear, mainly to do with this lexis, but also you could target any other errors that you hear as well. It would all be useful for the students. So you're writing down errors that you hear, you're writing down examples of good language usage that you hear as well, maybe typing that into a Word document as you go. And then at the end of the activity, get everybody back into the main room, and you can say, okay, what's one thing that your partner told you, Ahmed? What's one thing that your partner told you, Amir? Elicit some ideas first, and then move on to accuracy. So put up your Word document with the correct and not correct sentences. Let students have time to look at those sentences and decide which are correct and not correct, and then have a session together looking at those errors. Okay, students will find that really useful, I think. Now we come to the grammar. Now the grammar needs a context, a place where the examples that use the grammar comes from. And in this piece of material, it's this listening. Okay, this listening. All the stages of the listening are there. There's a simple first task in exercise 1 and a more complex task in exercise 2, and some follow-up in exercise 3. So feel free to use the listening. I think if you're tight for time, if you are the person doing the grammar in the 45 minutes, you will need to create a slightly different context. I would look at the tape script, use the ideas from the tape script, but maybe create your own dialogue, okay? You can write the dialogue out, keep it quite short, make sure it has examples of have you ever, and I've, and maybe I've never, like the ones in the listening example. And maybe cut up the dialogue, put the sentences in the wrong order on a slide, and get the students to have a look and put them into the correct order. Then you can use that dialogue in order to introduce your grammar. Now the grammar, as usual in Stfwd, is just presented in a box. So this really just leads us to reading it out loud, which isn't going to engage the learners. So we need to think about how to engage them in the grammar. I would have examples from the listening or the dialogue that you've created, and then ask questions to guide the students through the meaning. Okay. So, for example, if the sentence is I've met Rafael Nadal, I would say, okay, so when did I meet him? In the past or the future? Yeah, the past. Yeah, is it finished? Yeah. Okay. Do we know when it happened? No, we don't. Is it important when I met him or the experience? It's the experience. So what I'm doing there is I'm using concept questions to guide students through the meaning. And then I'd give another example and ask the questions again to see if they've got it. The teacher's book notes gives you lots of good information on this, and there's a timeline in the language reference page as well. So you're going to need to really analyse this grammar. Now, I give you a warning, which is that the present perfect simple has at least 3 different uses. Okay, so if you go to a grammar book, you're going to see a lot of information. We are only covering the one use here, and that is sometimes called present perfect for experience. Okay, so be very clear about the use of the present perfect you're covering, and don't go sliding into other uses. Okay, I think some of the students will have met this before and some of them will not. Okay, so treat it quite thoroughly to ensure that everybody understands. And I think it's useful to contrast with the past simple, which is what they do in the second part of the box here. I've met Rafa Nadal, and then I met him in New York in 2010. So when we do know the time, what do we use? Oh yes, past simple. Okay. So it's important to look at meaning first. Okay, look at the examples, talk about the meaning together, use concept questions, use a timeline, and then elicit the form. Okay, form of the present perfect is going to be have or has plus one of these lovely things, a past participle. Okay. Students might also call them verb 3. Don't let that throw you off. We've got regular past participles and irregular ones, okay? I think here we've got a mixture. And this activity here in exercise 1 in the blue box is that they have to give the infinitives of the past participles. I've done verb tennis before, which is quite fun. So you get one student to say a base verb and a name, and then the name of the person has to then say the infinitive. Okay, so person at 1 says drive, Sarah, and Sarah has to say driven, and then choose another student to give a base verb and choose another one to give the past participle. Okay, probably need a bit of thinking time first so that they can think about the past participles, or you can just do this activity as it is, looking at the past participles in the box and thinking what are the infinitives. Yeah. Equally, you can make a set of Quizlet slides with base verbs and infinitives on them, and maybe do a matching task or use one of the games on Quizlet. Underneath, there's the dialogue. I think it's really important that students get a good opportunity to do some written controlled practice for this grammar form to really consolidate the form in their head. So number 2 is very useful for that. Bit boring, but it's necessary, I think. And this is a great task for getting students to really use the language and try to activate it. So you really want to be trying to spend about 20 minutes on this activity and using breakout rooms to maximize the speaking time for the students. Okay, so they're asking, have you ever questions? Have you ever driven a sports car? Have you ever eaten in an expensive restaurant? If you want to change some of these, I don't think any of our students have stayed in a 5-star hotel. I could be wrong, but there you go. So you might want to change some of these items to be relevant to your students. Have you ever visited Cardiff Castle, for example? Then if the student says no, you ask another question. If they say yes, then you might say, oh, when did you go there? What did you do? So can you see we're contrasting present perfect and past simple? Demonstrate it in the main room with everybody. Then put them into smaller groups and get them talking. While they're talking, you need to be listening and noting down examples of good language use that you hear and examples of errors. Focus mainly on the target language, present perfect, past simple, but equally any errors that you pick up will be useful for the students. At the end of the activity, get everybody back in the main room, ask them for some information. Oh, Soma, what did you find out from your group? Tell me one thing you learnt, etc. And then focus on accuracy. So bring up your Word document where you've put examples of good language use and errors. Give the students a chance to look at it and decide for themselves which ones are correct, which ones are not correct, and then come in together and talk about that. So you really want to get to this exercise 4 with a good amount of time left, so that students have got a lot of time to talk, a lot of time to make mistakes, and a lot of time for us to give them feedback on those mistakes, because that's where the learning's really going to start taking place. Okay, I think it's an enjoyable lesson for the students. I think it's something useful as well. We often start conversations by saying, oh, have you ever da-da-da? So it's a good conversation opener, and they might need that in their everyday lives.